So the month is officially over, and that means it's time for a wrap up. Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex, and today is the February 2024 wrap up. So everything that I read in February with the ratings. Let me just take a second and go over my ratings with you real quick. 5 stars means absolutely best of the best. I loved it. I always recommend it. And I didn't have any issues. 4 stars means I still really liked it, but I did have some issues. Maybe it was pace, maybe one of the characters didn't really work out for me, something like that. It was a really good book, but it wasn't perfect. 3 stars means I didn't like it, but it was a subjectivity issue, which means it just probably wasn't the right book for me. I wasn't the right reader for this book. 2 stars, I didn't like it. I probably won't recommend it, and it had serious flaws. 1 star, worst of the worst. I'll never recommend it, and I'll probably not ever read the author again. You have to be pretty egregious to get a 1 star from me. Before we get into it, make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and all we do on this channel is talk about books. If you like listening to people talk about books, here I am every week doing just that for you. So, February was Black History Month, so all of the books that I chose to read were by BIPOC POC authors. There was my book club book that I did not select, we do a voting system for that, and that was not by a BIPOC author. But I am happy to talk to you about that today. I hope that you diversified your bookshelf in February to celebrate Black History Month, and that maybe you continue to diversify your shelf all year like I try to do. But yeah, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into it. The first book I read in February was One Night in Georgia by Celeste Norfleet. This cover gives me all the vibes. Honestly, I adore this cover, and I really liked this book. I talked about it on the Maybe series, and I was really excited about it. So we have 3 black women. I can't remember now what year it was. I want to say it was the 70s. The MLK assassination happened. We were right in the middle of the civil rights movement. Everything was kind of picking up momentum, and things were changing, but not everywhere. A lot of the northern states were seeing a lot of predominant change with civil rights movements, but a lot of southern states were really refusing to budge on any of their Jim Crow style laws. We still have a lot of segregation happening in the South. There was just a really odd moment in time when there were 2 sides of the same coin. It was literally night and day between what was happening in the northern states and in the southern states during the civil rights movement. And that is the time when we're reading this book right now. So we have 3 different women that all go to the same college together, and they're on summer break. And they decided a long time ago when they started college together that they would all take a road trip from where they were living in the New York area to Georgia, where their school is located, on their senior year. So the 3 girls decide to take this road trip together for their senior year to go down to start school in Georgia. Like I said, this was at a really tumultuous time in the US, and so we start in sort of a safe area with these girls, and we slowly move towards the southern states where things are not so safe for people of color, and there are still a lot of biases and issues happening. And as a way for the girls to feel a little more safe, it's heavily recommended to them that a man go with them. So a young black man that was in the army, I think, ends up going with them. It's a friend of a friend kind of thing, and he ends up tagging along with them to make sure that they get to school okay, and he also goes to school down there. This is turning into a really long explanation. So the premise of the story is they're taking this road trip from the north to the south, and at some point in the journey they end up in this sundown town, and a white man ends up dead, and one of the girls ends up with a gun in her hand that killed him. And that's all I'm gonna say on it. I will say that Norfleet did an amazing job getting like a lot of diversity in this book, because each of these women have like such different backgrounds. We have our main character, no, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but her father was like a really big civil rights activist, and he actually had a really sad story that is very prominent in the book. But so she comes from like a really big like civil rights family, you know, Black Power, all of that. And so she's more of an activist. And then we have another woman that's like, her family is actually really rich. Like, they live in a very affluent neighborhood. They have like maids and stuff like that. They run in a very high up circle. And so her family does tell her this in the book, that like they've pretty much protected her a lot with their money from a lot of the racism that happens around them. Because they were black with money, they kind of had a different angle on the civil rights movement, and they were almost like pardoned from racism because of how much money they had. And then we have another young girl that is part of like a really badly kept family secret, and basically she's what black people would have considered white passing back then. And so that comes with its own territory of issues during the civil rights movement, and it causes like a really big issue with them all traveling together, because a lot of times people think that she's a white woman traveling with black women, and this sort of rocks the boat like every time that they encounter new people. And it's just another dynamic of the story, like another challenge that is delved into. I think Norfleet made a really interesting decision making all these women from like very varied backgrounds, and it added a lot to the story. And we got a lot of extra conversations about what it meant to be a black woman in the civil rights movement. I really liked this book. There's a really beautiful little understory that's happening here, as well as a lot of really good conversations. So I ended up giving it 5 stars because I absolutely adored it. Like, there was just so much to love about this book for me. It was just a snapshot in time, honestly. It was heartbreaking and sad, but there were also just this beautiful like magnetism to this book that I absolutely loved. Now, I will say the reviews for this book are extremely varied. Like, there are some people that were so pissed about this book because it had a romantic element in it, which I didn't mind that. It didn't bother me at all, because we're just looking at this small moment of time in these 3 women's lives. But apparently some people were really upset that it had a romantic element in it. So if you're looking for a civil rights book that has no romantic elements in it, probably don't read this. But I don't know. I loved it. And that was the longest explanation ever. The next book I read in February was Take My Hand by Dolen Perkins-Valdez. This was on a maybe series like last year, and I brought it back because I really wanted to read it last year when it was on the maybe series, and I couldn't get it from my library, and so it was like a big thing. I actually had trouble getting it from my library this time. And I ended up getting it in large print, which like my eyes were very grateful, but it was large print. This is based on true events of a nurse that uncovers that the clinic that she works for that serves predominantly poor and black women are sterilizing their patients without their consent or knowledge. This is happening right around the time that the Tuskegee Airmen thing like all came out and was being put to trial. This was also in the middle of the civil rights movement when all this was happening as well. If you don't know about the Tuskegee Airmen experiments, I highly suggest you look into that because it's devastating. And I do remember from my childhood, like my mom was not super into teaching us a lot about the civil rights movement. I don't know. She was a teacher, by the way. But I feel like I didn't learn very much about the civil rights movement, but she made me learn about the Tuskegee Airmen experiments. Like, that was something she made me learn about. And I highly encourage you, if you don't know what I'm talking about, to just do a quick Google and click around and see how you feel about all that. That does end up in this book. Like, they do talk about it because, like I said, it's happening all at the same time. Like, all of this is sort of coming out and being put on the legal chopping block, and like people are asking lots of questions, and so these are almost go hand in hand with the type of content. So we have our main character, can't remember her name now, I'm so sorry, but she starts working at a predominantly poor and black clinic, helping women get birth control and pregnancy help and things like that. And part of her job is to go out to these very poor houses and give women birth control injections. It's like the depot shot. And so she gets assigned to these two young girls that are like 9 and 11 or something like that, and she's instructed to give them the depot shot, even though it does not appear that they're old enough to be having sex or to even be on their periods or anything like that. And where she goes to find them, like where they're living, is in basic squalor. They don't go to school, they don't have hygiene, they don't have regular food, etc. And so she makes it her mission to basically help this family get back on their feet and get out of their situation. And in the process of doing all this, she starts asking questions, about the conditions that the clinic is putting these women under. Not just with these two girls, but then like in general. Like, are we doing the right thing by doing all these things? And in the process of this, they start uncovering that maybe the depot shot is not safe for people to be using, and that they're predominantly only giving it to black women. And it opens this whole can of worms about things. And then something devastating happens to these two young girls under the guise of medical care. And that also blows up the whole situation. This book was terrifyingly sad because I know it's true. There were cited sources in the back of the book. I Googled it. This was a predominant thing that was happening at the time, and honestly, this is something that still happens. Unlawful sterilization still happens in the United States. Right now, it's being predominantly pushed on migrant women and refugees. This is not something that was contained to the 70s. It's still something that happens in the United States unlawfully, and it's just egregious. And if you look at the stats at how differently like women are treated because of their race medically, it is astonishing and sickening, and it's something that people don't talk about enough. This book really highlights those intricacies of that and how they treat women, and especially black women, very differently from white women. There are a lot of amazing and powerful conversations in this book. There are a lot of things that really were eye-opening. I knew that there were a lot of medical disparities. I knew that. It was still hard. It was still hard to read. And it's still hard to come to terms with that we live in a country that still does things like this and pushes this narrative all the time. I highly suggest you read it. I really do. If you're even interested in this sort of line, I think it's important that every woman read this book. I think it's important that everyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say like medical disparities against minorities, I think if you don't understand what I'm talking about, I think you should read this book and just let your mind run wild with that and just go down a little spiral on the internet about it. Start pulling up cases, start pulling up news stories, start pulling up statistics from medical journals. And I think that because we refuse to talk about things, we think they don't exist, and they very much do. I'm gonna stop because I could really talk about this a lot. I ended up giving this 4 stars because, okay, the content of this book was amazing. The historical value of this book was amazing. I absolutely loved the story that Valdez wrote. But the pace for me, I struggled a lot. And I feel like she didn't give us the whole story. Like, this is fictionalized historical, right? Historical fiction, right? Because it is based on something that really happened. But the fictional part of it, like um, the story we were getting from our main character, I feel like she didn't finish it for me. And I felt like she left me hanging on some of the final details. And I was just really wanting a little more closure at the end of the book about what happened to our main character and what she ended up doing at the end of it. So, 4 stars. I highly recommend it. I think everyone should read it. The last book I read in February was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Longest name ever. This was chosen for my book club. I don't know how I feel about this book. I'm just going to be completely honest. I don't know how I feel about this book. Because I don't understand what Mandel was trying to do, honestly. Okay, so premise. We have a very large cast of people that endure a pandemic event. It's called the Georgia flu. It's a new strain of flu, and it basically kills people within 24 or 48 hours. 48 hours, I think. And so we're sort of jumping back and forth in time to like patient 0 time when everything was hitting and everyone was getting sick, to about 20 years in the future when the world has all like shut down and like all the survivors have, like, that's all that's left is survivors, and so they've made their little towns and their little communities. And in that, we're following this group of people that is a traveling orchestra, but they also do like theater and stuff. So they basically have this little caravan and they drive around from little town to little town, and they put on like a Shakespeare play, and then the symphony will perform. And so it's sort of like a collection of lost people that have made a new family, which I love. And throughout this, they're trying to find 2 missing people from their symphony, right? And as we're getting more into the story, more people end up missing, and it becomes this thing that they're trying to all reconnect. They're all trying to reach one destination where they can all find each other again. So while we're getting that story, we're also getting the story of the pandemic like progressing. The cast for this was huge. I'm not even kidding. I did this on audiobook, and let me tell you, if I hadn't done it on audiobook, I don't think I would have kept up. There were still times when we were in the audiobook when I was like halfway through the book and I was like, who's this person again? And I'm just sitting there listening, and then it would take me a minute to put the pieces together about who we were talking about. And some people didn't even get names. Some people didn't even have names. I didn't know what to think about this book because I felt like we were all moving in one direction, right? And then when we sort of reached the pinnacle of the story, I felt like it was so anticlimactic that I wasn't even excited. And I feel like this book was more about like the journey, but we're having 2 separate journeys. Like, we're having a journey of like everybody's life before the pandemic, and then when the pandemic happened, and then 20 years into the future. And it's sort of like one of those stories where everything is like serendipitous, like people have these weird connections to each other, but it all forms from one connection, like one person. So basically it's like one person. If one person didn't exist, then none of these other people would be interconnected. But this one person that Mandel was tying this whole story to, I could not care about. I could not care about this character. I really couldn't. And I feel like that sort of, because we were getting a lot of this character's story, and because I didn't care very much for them, it made it difficult for me to connect to that part of the story, which meant that it made it hard for me to connect to pretty much everybody else. This book was really long. The pace was just not for me. I had so much trouble staying interested in this book. I was about 100 pages in, and I still was not understanding like where we were going with the book, what the point was, like where was I supposed to be focusing my mental energy with this book. And I still don't know. I still don't know where I was supposed to be focusing my mental energy, because I didn't get out of it what I think Mandel was wanting me to get out of it. On the side of this book, it said science fiction. And immediately when I put the book down at the end and I saw that tag on the side, I immediately said, that's not a science fiction novel. It felt like contemporary fiction with a dystopian element. That's what it felt like to me. But so like I didn't even feel like it was a science fiction novel. It did not feel science fiction-y to me at all. It felt like a dystopian-esque novel, which I guess like dystopian novels would fall under like the umbrella of science fiction, but I would not have categorized that as science fiction by a long shot. So if you're looking for a science fiction book, this is not something I would recommend as science fiction. Um, and the only reason I would categorize it as like contemporary fiction, or I would also categorize it as like character-led drama, because that's what it is. It is a character-led drama. But by a lot of characters, because there's a huge cast for this book. Yeah, I'm not going to talk on it too much more. I think if you like the work, you would have to work for this book. Now, there were some really beautiful connections in this book. Like, when Mandel pulled enough of the strings, I was like, that's pretty neat. And there were a lot of really neat moments and connections, and there was a lot of nostalgia in this book as they're like calling back to like the way things used to be. But as a whole, I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to be doing. I couldn't figure out where she was wanting me to look, where she was wanting me to put my energy. I couldn't put it together enough to enjoy it. And like I said, the cast was so big, I had trouble connecting everything together. I had trouble caring about everybody because there was just the sheer number of people I was supposed to care about was too big. I think the idea was pretty good, and I just don't think I was the right reader for this. So I ended up giving this 3 stars because I don't think I was the right reader. I had a lot of trouble deciding on the rating for this because my first instinct was to put 4 stars because I didn't dislike it. And usually when I say 3 stars, it means I didn't like it. I didn't dislike it. I thought that the writing was decent. I thought that the overall story was kind of cool. And like I said, there were times when the connections were made that I was very impressed and excited. And I thought that that was really interesting. And there was one character in particular that I really, really, really liked. And I thought that the storyline for that character was done really well. But pretty much everything else I was like struggling through. So if I had to be nitpicky about it, I would say it'd be like a very high 3 or a very low 4. But to just give it the 4-star rating for me when I didn't like genuinely like it all the way, I couldn't do it. So I gave it 3 stars and that's it. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. It was a difficult book. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. That is the February wrap up. And I talked for a long time. For 3 books, I talked for a long time, and I do apologize for that. It was a really interesting mix this month. Like I said, I had my 2 Black History Month books that I absolutely love. Like, those 2 books I highly recommend to you. We had Station 11, which, yeah, it didn't work out for me that well. But, I mean, that doesn't mean it won't work out for you. It just means that I wasn't the right reader for it. I'm excited about the March content that's coming up, and I hope you guys are too. There's going to be a giveaway coming up very soon that I will start giving information on. And yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. So make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you read for February, if you diversified your bookshelf that month, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!